Here we are. Okay. Um, in Richard Square, which has been reduced, is a copy of Bruce's book, The Bitter Past by Bruce Burgess. Okay. And I just want to say if you haven't read it, take some time over the holidays after you get the tree up and the gifts wrapped and everybody fed and you've collapsed in the big easy chair with a nice big glass of eggnog and definitely check it out. So I've got tonight we are being joined by Bruce Burgess. His debut novel, The Bitter Past, is The Bitter Past. In The Bitter Past, the story follows Lincoln County, Nevada Sheriff Porter Beck as he works to solve a gruesome murder that leads him back to the dawn of the atomic age and the hunt for a Soviet spy left behind all those years ago. So I am very excited to be here tonight with Bruce. I've been looking forward to this. Um, I have to admit, though, his book has me calling up everyone important to me in my life and telling them I love them. Never mind that this is a masterful debut mystery novel, brilliantly done. But I need to talk about its content first. Now, I don't know if any of you remember, but there is a line in Men in Black, the first one, where Kay says, there's always an Archilian battle cruiser or a Carillion death ray or an intergalactic plague that is about to wipe out all life on this miserable little planet. And the only way these people can get on with their happy lives is that they do not know about it. In doing my research for this interview, I checked out Bruce's talk with our chapter vice president, soon to be President Claire Booth. In her blog, Do Some Damage, the two of you talked about several near misses from this time frame. And I think I gave Richard the link to put into Claire's blog if you want to see the whole thing. But I just want to read a little bit from Claire's discussion with Bruce. It says, the bitter past revolves around that wacky time in our history when we were figuring out just how fast we could destroy the world. As we anxiously await publication day, which was June 18th, I thought it might be fun to take a look back at our atomic history and showcase just how crazy things were. There's a photo of 5 Air Force officers who in 1957 volunteered to stand directly under a nuclear bomb detonation to prove once and for all that men are always dumber than women. Also, in 1957, we knew there was a chance that a nuclear bomber might one day have an accident, so we decided to conduct a test to see what would happen if the plutonium from a warhead cracked open and leaked all over someone's living room. That test was called Project 57. My husband was I was telling him about this said, "Oh yeah, Project 57." That test was called Project 57 and the bitter past does a what if of its own with it. 9 years later, in 1966, a B 52 bomber collided with a refueling plane. One of its four unarmed bombs fell into the Mediterranean Sea, while the other three rained mainly on a plane in Spain, two of which spilled plutonium over a nice farming village. Fortunately, the US government was able to clean most of it up and ship it to the state that drew the short straw, South Carolina. Do we have anybody here from South Carolina tonight? Is there anybody left at South Carolina? Anyway, we look back on these incidents and wonder how we managed to survive this long. It's no small wonder. Frankly, I don't understand how we made it out of the 1950s. And when you read The Bitter Past, you may not either. Now, I admit, I did not know most of this history, and I have not slept as easily since I was apprised of it. Which strikes me the most is the sort of childlike trusting of the government when it says, it has checked this out and we are safe, you know? So, my first question for Bruce was, do you think this country could ever be that trusting again today?
Penny, first of all, thanks for doing this with me. It's great to be here with you guys, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my book. So, to answer your question, I think we've certainly lost some of that gullibility when it comes to what the government tells us. A lot of that is because we have so much more access to information than we had in the past, and we have much more experience now with things that we were told that turned out not to be true. But during the 1950s, when we were testing our atomic weapons in the desert outside of Las Vegas, we didn't know a great deal about the effects of radiation exposure on people and livestock and even water tables. Did we sugarcoat the truth once we did know it? Sure, I'm sure, absolutely. But I think people were just generally more trusting back then. Nowadays, all you have to do is look at how skeptical much of the population was about COVID vaccines and even the last election. So our default now maybe has switched a little bit to be where we don't trust what the government is telling us, right? At least right off the bat. There's a much higher standard of proof, I think.
Mm. There used to be a joke that used to go, there are three great lies in the world, and one of them is I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's when you know you're really in trouble, right?
So, okay, all right. In your bio, it says you write stories about families and the people who will do anything to protect them. The title, The Bitter Past, suggests a complex history for your characters. What inspired you to delve into the theme of past regrets and redemption in this novel?
Well, when I began outlining the central characters for my book, one of which is a man who comes to America in the 1950s to spy on our nuclear program, I had to ask myself about motivations and circumstances. All of us are born into a set of circumstances and geography. We don't usually have the benefit of omniscience. We simply believe that our side, the side that we know and are familiar with, is the right side. So when a soldier considers putting on a uniform, he doesn't typically shop around for a country. He wears the uniform of the country he's from, where his family's from. But sometimes people, especially when faced with life or death situations, see beyond the geographic borders that typically constrict their view of the world. They change. So, yes, the bitter past is all about past regrets and possible redemption. I think that and we were talking a little bit about this before the meeting started. I think we all like characters who have secrets and flaws, people who aren't perfect. And I wanted characters that were going to have to make tough decisions.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, and they certainly do. They certainly do. Um, I've I've talked about the book, and I really hope that a lot of you have had a chance to read it. But for those people who haven't yet, would you share a little bit from The Bitter Past with us?
I certainly can. So I'll just do a quick little bit from really chapter two, because if I read chapter one at all, it's kind of going to blow some stuff out of the water for you. So this is after there's been a body discovered that turns out to be a retired FBI agent. And my sheriff, Porter Beck, is in his office when a very attractive lady from the FBI walks into his office. I'm deep in thought, staring down at the pictures of the tortured body of Ralph Atterbury, and don't see her walk into my office, which is not exactly expansive. Her words don't register either, and I can understand why that might set someone off. I'm just lost in in my own world sometimes. I'm sorry, are you not Sheriff Beck? The question finally reaches the hamster in my brain, currently on a smoke break, apparently, in charge of processing incoming messages, causing my head to lift slowly from the desk. Why do you say it that way? She is striking, mid-30s, by my almost always accurate age calculator. Long black hair parted in the center of a perfect Middle Eastern head. Dark eyes to go with her olive skin, an annoyed look on her slightly red lips. Pardon? She asks. You said, are you not Sheriff Beck? I'm still examining her, making mental notes, certain she knows I'm contemplating where our wedding should take place. She's in a tan leather jacket that stops at her waist, too light for this weather, so she is definitely from out of state. Gray scarf draped around her long neck that falls nicely onto her white t-shirt, beneath which I can see the product of a lot of core training and hot yoga. She's several inches shorter than me, about 5'8", and maybe all of 125 pounds with her clothes on. Zero body fat, a BMI built for a BMW. Right off a New York runway if she were so inclined. Yes, the results are in. She's a good match for me. The lady ignores the question and pulls out her ID, her badge, bright and shiny just like she is, sticking it in my face. Sana Locke, FBI. How do you do? Sana. Name falls like a steel ball through my mental pachinko machine. Arabic, meaning mountaintop. Splendid, brilliant. Yes, I agree. Her mountaintop is truly splendid and brilliant. I detect a trace of East Coast upper crust in her voice. Maybe Brown University, possibly Wellesley. Good meeting you, Sana. I was kind of expecting someone from the Bureau yesterday. Did you walk up here from Vegas? When she responds only with a muscle twitch in her jaw, I feel compelled to restart the conversation, minus any snide editorials. I was just reviewing some of the crime scene photos. She nods. I'd like to see it, please. Photos? Her eyes close, her exhalation controlled, like she's just finishing a meditation session and has pushed every thought of backwater law enforcement types out of her serene mind. The crime scene, Sheriff, the crime scene.
It's lovely. It is, it's really nicely, so nicely done. Um, but okay, so without giving away any spoilers, the novel takes many unexpected turns. So, how did you approach plotting and structuring the story to maintain suspense and keep your readers engaged?
Well, that was a little bit more difficult than I had originally imagined. I had never done a dual timeline story. And when you're jumping back and forth from the present to the past, or I guess between any two particular time periods, maintaining suspense can be a bit difficult. My beta readers and my editor really helped me set the pacing so that I didn't lose readers during those transitions from time period to time period. And I think that's something that I think I probably wrote 7 drafts of the book, and I needed some help with, quite honestly, to make sure that I was keeping that tension and that suspense up. And I knew I had to be careful with artificially slowing the story down. And what I mean by that is when you go from, say the present to the past, and you've left something, action oriented happening in one of those time periods, and then you jump to the other time period, you can kind of slow the story down simply because the reader now has to take a break from that time period and read about something else. So you can end up having that problem. I spend an inordinate amount of time, not just on this book, but others, thinking about how to spin things in a different direction. I usually take long walks where people passing me in cars or just walking by me on the street probably look at me and wonder what I'm mumbling to myself about. Um, and that's when I'm trying to work through some of this stuff. And when you're writing a mystery, you're kind of obligated to obfuscate, right? I mean, to be a card-carrying mystery writer, you have to swear to lead your readers down a path and then yank that path out from underneath them. So that's how I approach maintaining suspense in any of my novels. And it was more tricky than I had thought it was going to be, possibly when I started the story. But quite honestly, what you see in the end product of the book now has far less of the past chapters than I originally had. We had to pare it down because the story really is about Porter Beck and what happens in the present. And we needed just the right amount of the past to give us that context and that other story.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that, and that that gives me a feel for uh how you got the dual timeline story done so well, and holding the reader's attention with the two stories going on at once. But I've just uh, uh my mind is just having a hard time wrapping itself around keeping that many balls in the air as you are writing. And so in my question to you, I said, how'd you do this? Scrivener, index cards, Sheriff Porter Beck's ability to remember everything he's ever heard. I mean, how did you keep them straight?
Well, I'm glad that you think I did a good job with that
Oh no,
because sometimes,
not just me. Several other people whose writing I respect also said the same thing. They've not seen a dual timeline story done as well.
well, that's very sweet and very kind words. I appreciate it. I have to tell you, I'm a serious plotter. I think any of you folks out there who are pantsers are absolutely insane. I do not understand how you do what you do. It would drive me crazy. Um, so yeah, a dual timeline makes things a bit more difficult. As I said, I do use Scrivener, and I really like that tool. I don't use it to its full extent. I've sat in on a couple of the tutorials on how far you can take that tool, but I do use it very extensively for outlining purposes. And I typically will do like a 20 to 30 page single space outline, which takes me from start to finish. And then I use on Scrivener the note cards as well to kind of set those chapters and scenes. And of course, the nice thing about Scrivener, if you have used it or you haven't, if you haven't, I would greatly encourage you to do it. Play around with it. You can put those chapters on note cards, and then you can kind of shuffle them around, move them around, just drag and drop, and that allows you to play with timing in the story. And so I also use it for sketching character bios and certainly documenting all my research. And that's really what I think is the power of Scrivener, is you get to keep the whole thing in a single document, in that binder, as they call it. It's just such a great tool. And in terms of getting it right, I think that the level of plotting, or that specific level of plotting that I had to do for this story, um, and laying out that foundation was critical to do before I got into the actual writing, because as you said, you have so many balls in the air with dual timelines, and some people write more than dual timelines, as multiple timelines. Again, it's extremely complicated. But what I would suggest to anybody who's contemplating doing this type of story is, first and foremost, read a lot of that genre. It's always been a favorite of mine, which is probably why I decided to give it, take a whack at it. But I would say read a lot of that genre, study it, study how those authors structure those novels. I read a lot of Kelly Rimmer's novels and John Boyne, both of whom write just those wonderful dual timeline stories, typically about World War II in that era. And give your main character something to overcome. We talked about flawed characters being very interesting. My protagonist, he's the sheriff in a rural county. He does have an interesting ability in that he has complete recall of everything that he hears. So it's kind of an auditory gift that he has, and that can take him, once he recalls something that he heard, he can actually picture that place and time and everything that happened. But he also has a progressive disability, and that disability makes him vulnerable. So his approach to everything has to take that disability into account. So I would say, again, find something like that in your characters. It just makes them more interesting to a reader, makes them more human.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that what was amazing to me is how your characters are all richly and nicely developed. The banter and romantic tension between the sheriff and the and FBI agent Sonia Locke is palpable. Can you share some insights into how you developed and crafted the characters, particularly protagonists, to make them so compelling?
Well, again, I'm glad you think they were compelling. Um, I can't say enough about how important I think it is to build your characters ahead of time. Now, if you have the capability of doing that in your head, good on you. I don't. Um, so what I do is I sketch out everything about a character that I can possibly think of. And again, you can do that on Scrivener. You can do that, on note cards or whatever you want to do. A Word document if you want. But put together some character bios that will tell us or tell you as the writer things like what do they look like? What do they sound like? What kind of personality do they have? Are they married? Are they divorced? What are their politics? Put all that stuff down on paper before you start writing because that will help you maintain the continuity of that character or those characters during the story. Because the last thing you want to do, and I've done this myself, you guys probably have done this too if you have beta readers, you might read something in your story and then come back and say, your character did something in chapter 7 which seemed to be totally out of character for him or her. So you want to have a detailed bio, detailed to the extent that you kind of know who this person is and how they would react in a situation. So again,
Uh-huh.
you can maintain that continuity. For me, for my central character, again, he's a sheriff. He's not a superhero. He's human. He's quick on the draw with humor, and that's probably what attracts Sana Locke to him. His humor telegraphs his intelligence. I wanted him to have a romantic interest that was every bit his equal. So I gave Sana a background that in many ways matched Beck's. And the main plot in the story is a mystery, but so is Sana to Beck. And he's trying to solve that at the same time he's trying to solve the larger mystery.
I was thinking when I was reading the dialogue, which again was luscious, between Sana and Porter Beck, and thinking you did a really nice job of making him enough of a smartass to be amusing without crossing the line over into asshole, because there are people who aren't as funny as they think they are,
Right,
and they have that quick, sarcastic comeback for everything you say, but at some point you want to bitch slap them,
right.
because you just want them to shut up. They're not funny anymore. And Porter managed to maintain that repartee between her and have it stay. So you sensed that it was a courting that was going on here. It was a mating dance that we were
Right.
watching
Very
between the
much so.
two of
Yeah.
them,
That's a good way to
and
describe it.
it was fun, and you it was kind of enjoyable as a reader to just kind of sit back and observe this and watch it develop and see where it was going to go. Before I forget, somebody asked for the names of the authors that you mentioned. If anybody is reading the closed captioning, it will say the names that Bruce just mentioned of authors that he read to help him with the dual timeline and with his development of the story. If anybody else is reading that and can go back and pull it up and put the names of the authors in the chat, I think that would make more sense than having him try to remember what he said and then us trying to write it down and put it in the chat. So if one of the people behind the screen could do that, that would be great. If we can't get it done, I'll come back and ask you again at the end, Bruce, what the names of the authors that you mentioned, because
Yep. Yeah.
inquiring minds want to know. Okay. And there are some questions, but I'm not done asking my questions, so you have to wait. Okay, so um the tapestry themes of forgiveness and self-discovery are central to this novel. So, what message or takeaway do you hope readers will find in exploration of those themes of forgiveness and self-discovery?
Yeah, and you're right. There is a lot of both in the bitter past. And what I really wanted readers to come away with was really a couple of things. One, things and people are seldom what they seem, even to ourselves sometimes. And two, we are not who we are at our worst moment or moments. Now, you can have antagonists and you can have villains in a story who are horrible people. We all have them, and that's great. But I think just like your protagonist, you want your antagonists to be interesting characters. So I wanted to make sure that any of my characters, whether they were good or bad, that I allowed them to redeem themselves in some way, because it is a story about the bitter past, and that's not just our atomic or nuclear past and government secrets and things like that. It's personal past. Um, but I wanted to give people, and we all like characters that have the ability to change over the course of a story. And when you create characters who can change, you see that forgiveness often comes from self-discovery. It's what we realize about ourselves, really, that allows us to forgive. And so, again, the title, The Bitter Past, is about much more than what happened in the 1950s out in the Nevada desert. It's about what's happened to these characters in their respective journeys.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's really, really neat. And I think it is the way that you manage that uh theme running through and the forgiveness and the self-discovery. As a rule, I am not a big fan of historical fiction. It's not my first choice, but I I'm a fan. I really did enjoy this one. A lot, a lot. So okay, so there's some questions. Richard, did you want to read the questions from the audience?
I can. Can you hear me okay? Because I can't see myself.
I can hear you. Can you
Okay.
hear him, Bruce?
Yeah,
Yep.
Bruce, can you give us an idea about your research? Did you watch movies like Blue Sky, or did you read government papers about nuclear tests?
I had the distinct advantage of this is one time when being in Las Vegas paid dividends for me, because culturally, Vegas, I shouldn't badmouth my own city, but it's kind of a wasteland in a lot of respects. There's not a lot of bookstores here outside of Barnes and Noble. I mean, um, but we do have the National Atomic Testing Museum, because all of that stuff happened here in the Nevada desert. So you probably all seen the movie Oppenheimer by now, which is a great movie, by the way. Um, and once all of that, once the initial project, the Manhattan Project, was completed, the government started looking around for a place to actually develop more bombs and bigger and better bombs, and where can we do this in secret. So they settled on the Nevada desert. So we ended up having this museum here, and it was very instrumental in my research on the book. The folks there, the staff was extremely helpful and open to me. They opened their archives to me with all of the documents that at least to that point, and this is going back to about 2017, maybe 2018, to that point were declassified. Project 57, which is kind of plays into my book in a large way, which is a real project, had only recently been declassified. So I did a lot of research there. I did watch movies. I read a lot of history books, which is kind of my passion anyway. But I also read a lot of firsthand accounts, not only of people who worked out at the test site and for the government in various capacities, but who lived downwind of those tests. And for those of you who haven't read the book yet or don't know a lot about that period, so quite strangely and horrifyingly, the United States government decided that, and keep in mind that between about 1951 and 1960, the government detonated above ground about 100 nuclear bombs. And all of that radiation blew or was carried on the wind. And they would never do a test when that wind was blowing towards a large population center. Vegas at the time was only about 55,000 people, so it wasn't even a big town yet. But they wouldn't even do it if the wind was blowing south towards Las Vegas or west towards Los Angeles. They waited until the wind was blowing east. And all of the folks downwind in southern Utah, northern Arizona, and into perhaps western Colorado, were the recipients of the vast amount of that radiation. Now, eventually, we did learn that that radiation literally went all over the globe, and there's lots of scientific data to show exactly where it settled in some places and how many cancer cases were there. But as I said, I listened to a lot of firsthand accounts. Some people had already died, but the university here had very smartly captured their accounts of what it was like to live downwind and experience that fallout. So I was fortunate in having most of the information I needed for the research to be very readable to me.
Let me just jump in here for a second to let everybody know that your new book, Shades of Mercy, is due out in July. That's correct?
That is correct. I think the date right now is, yep, July 16th.
And I think we've got a link for and we have a link for the audiobook in the chat for anybody that's interested in getting an advanced copy, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And so this is more about Porter Beck and his father and
yeah. So I mean, the whole
life.
interesting cast of characters comes back for the most part, and it's a different story, obviously. And I'll just give you kind of a rough version, Reader's Digest version here. The book starts not long after the bitter past ends, some period of months. And Porter Beck is kind of in the middle of trying to figure out and stop the dramatic increase in fentanyl-related overdoses and deaths in his county. Keep in mind, this is a county of only about 6,000 people. It's literally the size of the state of Maryland, but it only has 6,000 people. So people are pretty spread out, but drugs find their way, just like they do everywhere, into his county, and people are dying. And while trying to figure out what's going on there, he runs into his oldest friend, who is now a very wealthy cattleman. And he learns that his old friend is involved in some things that he shouldn't be. And all of that leads him to a 16-year-old hacker who is currently incarcerated at the local youth center for committing a slew of internet-related crimes because she's just that good. She did manage to get caught and kind of sent away for a while, but she's brilliant. And so Beck is trying to use her to figure out what's going on in some other areas of his job, but he finds that both the Chinese government and a Mexican drug cartel are trying to get their hands on this girl as well. So her name is Mercy Vaughn, and that's why the book is called Shades of Mercy, because she is not at all what she seems to be.
Wow.
Well, back to the bitter past. Did the subject of how did the subject of nuclear testing speak to you? Do you have some kind of professional background in it in the sciences, or was that
nothing that I can speak about? No, I'm kidding. So I really don't, but I grew up here. And so I remember as a kid how now they had moved all the testing underground by the time I was living here, but you still knew when there was a nuclear test going on. They would announce it, you'd feel it. Even though we're 75 miles away and it was underground, you have windows rattle and things like that. So it always fascinated me from a historical standpoint. And I knew I wanted to eventually write something about that, but I didn't want to write a nonfiction book. That's not my deal. And I didn't want to just set the book in the past. I wanted, because a lot of people, um, people much younger than us are not at all familiar with that time period. So I wanted to make it relevant to today, and that's why I said, okay, I'm going to come up with a place and some characters who are alive today and are dealing with something that will take them back to that period. So that's kind of how I came up with the idea.
Yeah, you're very much a Nevada guy, and this is very much a Nevada story. So it's wonderful how you took something that you basically grew up with, and then made it relevant to the here and now. Because I mean, there are some of us who aren't that young who don't know near as much about this time as we should.
Right,
You know,
right. Yeah. It's an interesting part of our history.
scary
Yeah.
part of our history.
Yeah.
One of our members here thought it was very clever to put the current scenes in present tense and the old ones in past tense. And how did you choose? And did you try it several ways before that one worked best?
Yeah. And that's a great question. I did try several ways. I originally started with everything in third person, just a kind of an omniscient narrator. Um, but I decided about halfway through that I needed to give Beck, a real voice, and the present, like you said, to have its own voice. And that worked out pretty well. And I think it sets those two time periods apart. So, even if you forget that, the past sections start with the words the past, and the present sections start with a chapter number. Even if you forget what chapter you're reading, right away, just from the voice, you know which time period we're talking about.
Yeah, let's see. The book and your characters were fascinating. Do you have a favorite scene or chapter from the book?
Yeah, that's a great. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that, but I would say that I love the final scene, so I won't go into it. I mean, where the whole thing kind of gets solved. But I'll tell you what I was fascinated by. I write a little bit about it in the book. And again, what you see in the current version is somewhat less than I had in previous drafts when I talk about things that happened in the past. But as I mentioned, I listened to a lot of firsthand accounts of people who lived during that time, and people who lived downwind, people who were actually called and belonged to a group that is formally recognized by the government as downwinders. And they're all eligible for payments from the government for illnesses that they may have suffered, and many of them did. But I was fascinated when I spoke to some of these people about how upfront they were about saying, because I was perplexed. I didn't know how they just kind of sat by and let this all happen. And they really said, well, it was the 1950s. What choice did we have, first of all? But there was a war on. It was a war with the Soviet Union. Now, it was a Cold War, but everybody believed that this was a real war and that there was a race, just like the race to space in the 1960s. It was a race to get the biggest and best nuclear weapons, because the idea at that time was that you can win a nuclear war, or you certainly can lose one. So they thought of themselves as patriots. And so I mean, they just blew me away. And they are typically very rural people anyway. There's a lot of ranching and stuff out in those areas, and they see themselves as patriots. And even after they came to know, certainly suspect initially and then know later on, that people were in fact getting sick, livestock was dying, there was a lot of stillbirths going on. Even after that, they were willing to just say, you know what, that's the cost of doing business. That's our part in this war. So I tried to put that, I tried to flavor the novel with a little bit of that. I would have liked to have done more, but you run out of room, you run out of pages, especially when you're telling a dual timeline story.
Yeah. Yeah, that whole idea of saying, if this is the sacrifice my country asks of me, then I am more than willing to fall on my sword,
Right.
if that's what it's going to take. I mean, looking at it now and realizing that the idea that anybody would win a nuclear war is ridiculous,
Right.
but we didn't know that then. We didn't know, we just knew that the person with the biggest bomb had the biggest balls.
Yeah, we didn't know so much. I mean, we were doing duck and cover drills in school where you'd hide under your desk, and some of you may have actually done that.
Oh, yeah.
That's how much we didn't know. If you go out to the test site, if you ever have the chance to take a tour out there, they'll take you around to certain parts that you can actually see, but you'll see the buildings that they erected, and the mannequins inside that they posed in certain places to make it seem like there were people in there, and they put them at different distances from the blast site, from ground zero, to see how well they would survive, or if they would survive at all. I mean, we were playing with things we just didn't know about.
That's
Well, there's an
so
interesting comment here about one of our members said that they really like the dual timeline because it shows how history is still relevant. I think that's
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's not, well, I guess it's not funny, but when the book was very close to coming out, the war in Ukraine had just started. Um, Putin was talking on a daily basis about possibly using nuclear weapons, and that's still happening. Obviously, it is relevant, and it's probably more scary now than it was even back then.
because we know now what we didn't know then, but we still don't know it all. We
Right?
have no way of knowing the ultimate impact of something like this. We
Yeah.
really, really don't. Was it, if you forget your history, you're doomed to repeat it?
Mhm.
That's it's a really sad thing. So I the your book featured, really, really strong emotional undercurrents. And so I just wanted to know, as a writer, how did you navigate the delicate balance between evoking deep emotions and maintaining a cohesive narrative to the book and to the story?
Well, honestly, I'm not sure. I think if you tell a story with honest characters and honest emotions, a cohesive narrative should take care of itself. I guess I didn't really think about it. This story kind of shines a light on a number of things, and we talked about some of these. Our seeming fascination with weapons and war, patriotism, which, like beauty, is in the eyes of the beholder, right? Everybody thinks they're the patriot. The lengths that we will go to protect those that we love. So those are all strong emotional undercurrents, but they're honest reactions to that my characters actually have. They're organic. And I think, again, if you do those things, they will contribute to a cohesive narrative. So that's kind of how I approached it.
You guys have got to read this book if you haven't. And so, I had here what's next for Sheriff Porter Beck, but you told us a little bit about what's going to happen next, because we're all going to rush right out and get Shades of Mercy if we haven't. If we've already read The Bitter Past, we're going to read The Bitter Past if we haven't, and then rush right out and get Shades of Mercy. So we know a little bit of what happens next to him. But I'm just kind of curious, is there going to be an FBI agent in Porter Beck's future?
Well, the answer is yes and no.
Because you're already on book 3.
I'm writing book 3. And again, I don't want to spoil anything, but the answer is I think yes. I didn't want to do that right away in book 2.
Mm.
So I have a different potential love interest for Porter Beck in book 2, and she's a woman by the name of Charlie Bluehorse. She's a Paiute detective who works for the Nevada Criminal Investigative Division, and they kind of team up on this case with the hacker that I talked about. Um, so he's always going to have some competition for his romantic interest, and we'll see where that goes.
Well, that's exciting to know. Okay, and I don't know about anybody else, but my last question, is that a Polaroid camera over your shoulder?
It is, yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
we've got some old cameras here. Here's another one over here.
Is that a brownie? Is that a brownie
Uh,
back there with the flash attachment?
yes, it's a brownie.
Yeah.
Wow. You got quite a collection.
These belong to my wife's family. So my wife's a photographer. I don't know anything about photography, but she knows quite a bit. So she has those relics.
Can I just add here,
Antique,
Penny, that we have a link in the chat for where you can get the Bitter Past, as
right?
well as Bruce's website. So we welcome anyone to check those out.
Yeah, yeah. And I've got, we really enjoyed having Bruce. Wait a minute, did somebody she said it's a mystery what happens with the FBI agent. Um, wow. One of the people put in the chat early one morning in the 50s, I was with my father driving west to Travis Air Force Base, sky and the sky with a long bright light. He said it was one of the nuclear tests. And that gives you an understanding of how powerful those bombs really are. If we can see the brightness all the way to the Bay Area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not unheard of. And the Nevada test site is an immense area geographically, so I wouldn't rule that out as possibly being the reason why you might have seen that light, especially in the 1950s,
Yeah.
because there were so many detonations. You know.
Wow. Boy,
One more
that's
time, Bruce, can you give the names of the two authors that you referenced
yes.
in the
Yeah.
beginning?
So the first one was Kelly Rimmer, and Kelly is an Australian writer, and I don't know that there's anybody better at writing dual timeline stories, especially historical stories. Right now, she's my favorite. She's written books like The Things We Cannot Say. These are all World War II stories. She's written The Warsaw Orphan. I think The German Wife is another one, something like that. I think I've read all of them. And John Boyne, it's Boyne. He's the guy who wrote The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Some of you may
Ooh,
have read that book, and
yeah.
he's written a sequel. Gosh, I can't remember the name of it. I just read it, probably 6 months ago. Equally as good and devastating. I mean, these people put me to shame writing a story. It's just uncanny how good they are. So yeah, I mean, if you're into historical dual timeline stories, take a gander at some of their stuff.
Okay. So I think we've hit all the questions, right, Richard?
We have.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Bruce, for joining us on Meet the Author, and thank everybody for spending your time with us during this busy holiday season. And I want to take the opportunity to thank the Capital Crimes Outgoing Board for another incredible year and to wish the best and congratulate the new board that is coming in. It's going to be an exciting year. I'm going to turn back over to Jennifer, who's going to tell us about the anthology is coming up. And so I'm wishing everyone a happy holiday and a new year full of doing what we all love best, reading and writing books. So I'll turn it back
Thanks
over to
for
you,
thanks
Jennifer.
for having me again, guys.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you,
It was
Bruce.
Yeah,
fabulous.
thank you so much, Bruce. This was great. Congratulations on your new book and the upcoming one. And thank you for doing
Thanks.
this with us. We
Yep.
really appreciate it.
Thank
And hope
you.
to see you about your con.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to reiterate, this coming Saturday is our holiday party at Old Spaghetti Factory. January 20th is our panel of our short story panel, And at the end of that meeting, we'll be announcing the theme for the anthology. So hope to see you guys there. And
Are we
take
bringing a
care.
book? Are we bringing a book to the party
Yeah.
to exchange? We're doing the book
Yeah.
exchange. Okay. So remember to bring a book to share and exchange and take one home with.
Yep. All right.
Happy
Okay.
holidays. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Bruce.
Wow. Boy, that was fascinating.
Yeah, it was great.
Lots of great information.
Mhm.
It's just, I find myself feeling a little unsettled by all of that happened, that's history, that's real, that's not anybody's that's not just stuff made up. And it is amazing that we survived to 2023.
Right.
It really is.
I thought he did a really good job.
Oh yeah.
His descriptions, his dialogue was really great. I haven't read it yet, so but now it's kind of moved up to my pile.
Honey, you are in for a treat. I have to admit, I was dragging my feet because I had 50 other things I needed to do.
Yeah.
And I just sat down to read it because I had to. And I was hooked in the first chapter and just
Yeah, he's very good.
he is good.
Yeah.
He says, well, this wasn't really my first debut novel, it was my first debut mystery novel. I don't care. It was still
No.
damn fine work. Damn
Yeah.
fine work.
Hi,
So,
William. How are you?
okay,
Okay.
kids. Well, this
So
has been fun
yeah, thank you. And I guess
Yeah.
we'll see everybody at the Spaghetti Factory.
at the Spaghetti
Yes.
Factory. All
See you
right.
Saturday.
Bye.